I'm Gail Spreen. I'm Dennis Downs' wife, and I'm a real estate broker at Jameson Sotheby's. I've been in the Streeterville neighborhood for just about 30 years and working in real estate here on behalf of the community with our community groups, our city, our aldermen, always trying to make the neighborhood, a better place and influence how it turns out. I was able to meet Dennis about 25 years ago. My best friend married his brother. We were both standing up for the wedding, and from there it was history. So,
25 years. That's
yeah,
that's remarkable.
yeah,
Gail, I don't know if you know this, but I lived in Streeterville for about a year.
no kidding. I
Yeah,
did not
my
know
husband
that.
and I, before we bought our house in Sauganash, which launched this whole story,
Uh-huh.
he lived on Ohio, and so we
Okay.
lived over there, and that was over 30 years ago. So it was so quiet then. I was
Yeah.
there the other day, and I can't believe the traffic and how busy it is, and how much work you've done to make that a beautiful area of Chicago.
Well, it was a lot of vacant lots back at that time. So, yes, it was much quieter. So, we've seen a lot of development happen. And actually, Dennis has been part of a lot of the work in the Streeterville neighborhood because as of 25 years ago, it was just getting started, all the development. And then through through the years, as I was president of SOAR, the Streeterville Organization of Active Residents, like 5 times, and I led the real estate committee for um, basically about 20 years. And so Dennis ended up, part of every discussion and knowing everything, whether he wanted to or not, about everything going on in Streeterville. So through the years, back in 2010, he was commissioned to do the statue of the bronze sculpture, life-size sculpture of Cap Streeter that Streeterville is named after, which only ingrained Dennis that much more in the history of the neighborhood and everything that was going on, and all the people downtown as well, since he participated in so many of the events and that were happening. So actually, several years ago, just before COVID, we filmed a number of the developers, the stakeholders in the neighborhood who are all part of making Streeterville what it is today. And so we were able to get all of that footage basically in the can. And then COVID hit. And so during COVID is the time where we actually were able to put a documentary together, which really kind of told the story from the people who actually did a lot of the development. Sorry. And so with that, it was just after COVID when the theaters started to open that we were able to present our premieres at the AMC theaters in Streeterville, and then we did 2 premieres because we had waiting lists for it. We did the Chicago History Museum, which was fabulous, and then from there we basically put it online on YouTube. And so I still use our documentary to have people really appreciate the Streeterville neighborhood and learn more and more. Because I always feel, especially in real estate, the more they know about the history of the neighborhood, the more they'll be connected and want to get engaged in our community. And so it feels like a small community or a community in a downtown urban environment, which you don't think could actually be created, but we were able to. So Dennis, as I said, we did the documentary. He has done our Streeterville cleanups with us, from the beaches to the parks to the streets. There's no end to the things he's participated in downtown, as well as all of his other work that he has done. But I'm switching over to a lot of Dennis's work and who he
Wait,
was.
wait, before you go there,
Oh,
I just want to
yeah.
say I went to that premiere. It was
Uh-huh.
jam-packed. It was fantastic. You had all the big-time developers, all the politicians were there. It was really a terrific event at the AMC Theater in the area. So for people that maybe don't know where Streeterville is, why don't you give us a geography lesson?
Oh, sure. So Streeterville is the area that's between Michigan Avenue and Navy Pier, the Chicago River to the south, and then East Lakeshore Drive to the north, where Oak Street Beach is. So that's really the whole, those are the whole, the really the boundaries of the Streeterville neighborhood.
And one thing I learned in your documentary was that that was all landfill from the Chicago fire.
It was. So Cap Streeter ran his boat aground July 10th of 1886. And he stayed on his boat with his wife, Ma. And after the Chicago fire, he encouraged the contractors to dump their rubble into the lake. And so he helped create this 186 acres that was outside of the city limits. And St. Clair Street, just east of Michigan Avenue, was actually the shoreline back at that time. And the area was called the Sands. And so all this 186 acres that didn't exist before, he felt it was his because he helped create it, and he would sell off parcels. And there were lots and lots of battles that went on with the Potter Palmers and the Fairbankses and the city. And he actually, one of the things, like when the city would say, you can't sell alcohol on Sundays, Cap Streeter would say, I'm outside the city limits, so I can. So he would, he kind of was, some people say he was kind of a scoundrel. We said he was an entrepreneur and just a very eclectic kind of man who thought outside of the box, which is very similar to Dennis. And so I feel like Dennis channeled Cap Streeter
Oh,
in
totally.
many ways.
It must have been a rough and tumble time back then. And, when you think about even the DNA in Chicago and literally from the soil, here's this Cap Streeter character and the Dennis Downs character. And even before that, the Native Americans that lived on this land that were there. I mean, it just had to be, you had to be a survivor to live in this area.
Absolutely. Sometimes I think of it even now when we might have a really hot day or a really cold day, and you think, oh my gosh, there was no air conditioning, there was no heated cabins or shacks. And what they would build a fire outside and sit around a fire. And what a different time it was back then that they had to live through.
I think about that in Chicago, and interestingly, I just did the podcast on Council Bluffs, and there's a river there that Billy Caldwell built a old mill on that flowed into the Missouri River, and that river was called Mosquito Creek. And I think about how rough that would have been to work in that whole area with, the bugs, and like you say, no AC, and I just can't even imagine how difficult life would have been back then.
Right. So now Dennis started this like 7 years ago, is that Cap Streeter running his boat aground on July 10th of 1886. Every year we have a July 10th run aground party. So we celebrate the history of the neighborhood and Cap Streeter. And then this year coming up, we're tipping our hats to Cap Streeter and to Dennis and to the Streeterville neighborhood. So we're keeping the history alive, everything Dennis started.
I love that. I've been to your party on July 10th, and it's a lot of fun. And you've done so much for that community, Gail. I know you were president of the Thanksgiving Day parade to make that happen,
Well, I
and
was chairman
the
for
chairman,
three
yeah.
years.
I mean, just you've been so active and involved, not only in Streeterville, but Michigan Avenue.
I have been and I still am, and I just love it. And I call myself a hyper local real estate broker because I really just focus on downtown and our immediate area, which I just believe that being involved in everything in an area, you're doing the best service to your clients as well, because you can give them, really all of the updates. There's no surprises, and really my goal is always to make them feel part of the neighborhood. They're not moving downtown into some scary place in a high rise. You know what? They're moving into a community, and we have a lot of things that they can get engaged in and they can feel like they're part of the neighborhood.
Well, you've done a beautiful job at it, and you've been such a good friend over the years. I was trying to think back when I met Dennis, and it had to be at least 15 years ago, maybe longer. I like I said, I lived in Streeterville. Then my husband and I bought a house up in Sauganash, and that's where this whole Billy Caldwell story started. I started researching why my neighborhood was named Sauganash. And then actually it was 20 years ago because we moved up to Lake Forest in 2006.
Okay.
And it's when I moved up there and I started reading about the Green Bay Trail. And then Dennis Down's name came up because he was the trail marker tree, which I see on your screen there. That's Dennis's legendary tree that he designed and created so many bronze statues of. That one I know is the Lake Forest tree.
It is. It's based off of the Lake Forest tree, just off of uh, Wilmette Road, or no, it's Everett. Everett
Everett.
is what it is where it was. And this um, bronze sculpture is actually on Main Street in Antioch, which is, and they have a beautiful garden around it. And we'll have the Fourth of July parade will be going by shortly. And it's really a beautiful setting and gets a lot of exposure, which is great because Main Street in Antioch was actually an Indian trail as well, going north and south up to Wisconsin and down through Illinois. So it's really a meaningful location too.
I have one of those statues. It's, I think, about 12 inches tall and one of my prized treasures for sure. And that tree in Lake Forest was located on the southwest corner of Everett and Waukegan. So Waukegan Road is also an old trail. And and that's when I started learning about trail marker trees. And I was reading about the Green Bay Trail, the Waukegan Trail. I was doing research on Lake Forest history. And I came across this guy, Dennis Downs, and I got to his website, and there was all these trail marker trees. I'd never seen anything like it. And then I saw that he had this book, and I'm like, I need that book. And then I saw that he lived in Antioch. And so I think I emailed him that night and said, I need to come up and meet you. And so that was 2006, 20 years ago.
Wow. Yeah, right. And I remember meeting you. You had all the Boy Scouts come to the Grove, where Dennis, for 20 years, he did a big solo art show at the Grove. Every time he would do an art show, he would do a trail marker tree exhibit. So he had to always be educating the public about the trail marker trees. So that was always a big part of his shows. And so he had a bronze sculpture of a trail marker tree, I think, in the great room. I remember you there with all the Boy Scouts,
Yep.
and it was wonderful educating all these young kids. I mean, now it's Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, but really educating all of them and getting them to learn. That's how Dennis had learned about him as a child, and he never forgot it. So, just planting those seeds, you never know where it's going to take any of these young people, and some it'll connect with, some will, it won't. But all you need is a few of them, and the history will continue on. And that was always the goal, was to keep the Native American history of their whole navigational system they had alive, and to show how resourceful the Native Americans were. So I think Dennis has really accomplished that through his life, because now there's groups all around the country that have sprung up. What I always feel like he was a Johnny Appleseed of keeping the history alive from the early 1900s. And then it all kind of was quiet after 1940s with the World War and a lot of things happening. And so Dennis picked up the history, and in the 1980s and 90s really got it going all the way, through today. And so we want to continue his work, even though he's not here.
Oh, his legacy lives on for sure. Those Boy Scouts, actually, you wouldn't believe. I had one contact me about a month ago and reminded me about how much they enjoyed camping and learning about these things. They had to learn navigation, orienteering, and these trees were a way for Native Americans to navigate through this difficult terrain. And I
Right.
remember Dennis talking about the purpose of the trees, and you can probably describe it better than me.
Well, just even, that the trees then were bent as saplings and would allow, like the tree behind me, to have either one branch go up or two branches, or even maybe a three of them, and then they called them triple trunks, because the actual trunk of the tree is, when it's bent down, that will decay away and it'll have a very distinctive knob. But these would point direction towards a fresh water source, a cave opening, chert deposit, ceremonial grounds, anything that was very important to the Native Americans, where the Native Americans would follow animal trails as well, but the animals did not need chert deposits, so these would even point off of the trails to where they could find different resources that they needed that maybe the animals did not need. So they're just, these are hundreds of years old, and a lot of them are in demise these days. So um, we're trying to keep the obviously the history alive, but try to protect a lot of the older trees by even fencing them, because a lot of people, when they find one, they'll want to take some bark off of it, or which is terrible because that can kill the tree. And so on some others, just recently, there was a tree in demise in Deerfield, Illinois, and were with the park district there. We were bending another similar tree, an oak, right next to it, to then have that one replace this trail marker tree that's in demise. So again, keeping the history alive from generation to generation. And we have signage there, which is great, so that it really educates the public, whoever is going through the park. And even the park is called Trail Tree Park. So that's, very neat.
And it's a terrific place for people to learn. I've been there. It's Trail Tree Park, located on the south side of Deerfield Road, just west of US 41 up in Deerfield. And
Hmm.
it's a public park, so people can visit it. And you're right, the tree is fenced off, so people can't go in and destroy it. But they can clearly observe something that's left over from a couple hundred years. That it's almost hard to imagine that these trees are still here, but they are. And if you go to your website, you can see these examples of Dennis's. People ask Dennis from all over the country to come and witness their trees and verify them and validate them and document them. And
Yep.
how many trees do you think are still around in the United States?
Boy, it would be hard to say, because through some of the like Georgia and the southeastern, up in the Smoky Mountains, where there were some there. There's some in Tennessee, and people continue to find them and even contact Dennis yet. So I'm responding to them. And through Arkansas, I just got an email from someone from Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa. There's a great site in Iowa that it's on private property, but we took a couple of the Native Americans there, and it has like 45 trail marker trees, where they think that it could even be where Black Hawk had gone and had his meetings. And so it's on private property, hoping that someday Dennis's goal was to have the property owner um, give it over to the state, because there's a state park next to it, and then really preserve that so nothing could ever happen to that area. So there's so many special spots. And then again, all these people that continue to find them now that they hear about what they are. I mean, Dennis has even had young kids that are out in the woods. Now they're walking through the woods and they're looking for trail marker trees, and they will send pictures because they're consciously looking for them, which we think is so neat, that that they're looking for them. Very often they're not, they're just a bent tree. But the fact that these younger people are actually consciously looking, and so we just think that's wonderful. And you know what? There's been a couple times that some of the trees that these young kids had found and had sent to Dennis, they were actually trail marker trees.
Wow.
Because now on private property, where a lot of the older trees may still exist, there could be trail trees there. Where the trees that were marked along the sides of the paths that became wider roads, a lot of those were taken down because of the road widening.
Mhm.
Every once in a while, you'll see where they actually took a road around a trail marker tree, and they saved the tree, but that is more the exception than the rule. But
I remember Dennis talking about that where the tree is bent, that horizontal section is unnatural. And so when you are, 200 years ago trying to find the trail across the prairie, and your eyes scanning the prairie and you see this horizontal section, it almost looks like it could be a deer. And so that which would mean food and survival. So these trees were something that would catch your eye and you knew where to make that turn or where water might be or these council circles. And I always remembered that because I wondered, why did they bend it?
Mhm. And they were bent at a height that was pretty much like the height of the back of a deer.
Hmm.
So it would be, and it would be above the snowfall typically, so you could still see it in the winter. And granted, the woods were and the forest was very different at that time than it is now. They didn't have all the underbrush that we have now. So you could see in this vertical world of trees, you could see a horizontal plane much easier. And they were trained, their eye was trained as a hunter to really see that deer or that animal. And so that to that degree, it made it kind of an obvious shape for them to be looking for and was very functional. So it had several purposes, even the height of it, um, the angle of it. So it's just so thoughtful and resourceful, and it's so green. So as people these days want to be green, and nature focused, it's like, oh my gosh, how much greener can you be than using your trees for signage and wayfinding?
I remember I was up in northern Michigan, over by Glen Arbor, and a little bit on the west side of Michigan, and I found some trees that were bent. So I was so excited. I sent pictures to Dennis and said, I think I found some, which would be Chippewa area over there.
Right.
And he said back, he said, nah, those are not trail marker trees. And he told me that in the, I think it was 30s and 40s, that it was a hobby for people to graft trees and to bend them and design them. And so these were some hobby trees. And to your point, the bent part was probably 12 feet up higher than me. So it was not at, that deer length or height. But that this was something that people used to do in the 30s and 40s, graft these branches and make some interesting designs. And I've seen a couple in the Lake County area too.
Mhm. You can tell because the trunks will not be, as as wide or as
Right.
established. And
And
so,
that's what,
it's like, yeah, that's not 200 years old, you
yeah.
know, for when the natives were really here. And but again, it's even though it wasn't like an original, even Dennis has bent many, many trees around the whole Midwest, actually. And even up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, Dennis worked with the mayor of Green Bay, Jim Schmidt, at that time, where the Green Bay Packers gave the city of Green Bay a tree for like every touchdown. So we went up there and Dennis gave a lecture on trail marker trees. And then we had planted trees there in the park. And then we went back after they got established a couple years later, and we were with the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, and we showed them and did the bending of the trees, and then we put them in charge of taking care of those. So it's kind of fun that all over the place, Dennis has been keeping that history alive and helping to bend trees. So that's kind of fun. I haven't checked to see how they're doing these days, but hopefully they're doing just fine, and those Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts are taking care of them.
Not only did he influence Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, but I know a number of times he worked with the Daughters of the American Revolution, DAR, and worked with them on historical markers, trees, documenting things. Yeah, I know he spoke at their organizations many, many times. And there's just such a ripple effect of the Dennis Downs legacy.
Right. So the DAR, actually, the Native American part of the DAR, they had given Dennis a big national award for all of his work on keeping the history alive, and so he always felt a real close connection with the DAR, and we still are in conversations with them, especially down in Missouri. We've done a lot with that group down there.
Aw. I remember Dennis saying that he did, and make sure I get this right. He did art to support his research.
Mhm.
Is that
Right.
the right way?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Anytime he sold any art, it went right into his research and being able to travel more. And he never felt that research was done on a computer. You had to get out there in the field. It has to be done, you've got to be out there doing your research, not just try to do it online. And one of the things before, when Dennis was working on the book, he never had a cell phone. And so, believe it or not, he had to deal with payphones. And I would be always wondering when I was going to hear from him, because he's out in these remote areas meeting people he doesn't know. And so hoping that nothing crazy was going to happen. But he vowed he was not going to get a cell phone until after the book was done. So all of his research was very much authentic. And yep, that's Dennis. He's very authentic.
He definitely is authentic and one of a kind, and for sure, with the world changing as fast as it is with AI and everything else, I mean, his artwork, it wasn't just one medium. It wasn't just that bronze sculpture. It was paintings, it was drawings, it was photography. What am I missing?
He did his research pieces. He would go gather the blue stem meadow grass. He had a fire pit in his backyard, so he would boil the grass down and he would make his own papers. And then he was so authentic that he would take symbolism from the Native Americans, and he would make little characters from clay. Then he would take the pulp as the paper, and he would shape around the clay, and he would use an antler instead of using a knife or anything. He wanted to use everything the Native Americans would have used or had available at that time. So he made these beautiful pieces that were made of natural paper with symbolism of like the woman thunderbird. And he would use porcupine quills that he would inlay into the frames and into the pieces. And then on top of that, for paints, he would make his own walnut stain from the walnuts that would come down. He would use pokeweed to make the red stains that they would have had. So everything had to be authentic. He would make the frames out of basswood that was very sacred to the Native Americans, but because you wouldn't get slivers, you wouldn't get diseases from the basswood and oak. And even cedar frames. So he inlaid all of those just intricately and put porcupine quills and glass beads, anything the Native Americans would have had at that time. So that's his artwork. Again, as authentic Dennis was, his artwork, reflected that.
You can find a stronger ally for Native Americans, and particularly in this Great Lakes region. I mean, Dennis knew the Great Lakes, and he traveled extensively around with his artwork, but also his speeches and his um, uh, speeches and also just his demonstrations. So I know there's a documentary coming out about him, and um, I had a chance to interview with Leslie, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. When we did the Billy Caldwell film, I have a lot of film of Dennis. So once Leslie's film comes out, I want to add a couple more short films of maybe things that Dennis mentions that it won't be in Leslie's film, but we want to make sure we capture everything because the world has so much to learn from Dennis.
Truly, I swear. So this makes me cry. But he was born 100 years too late, and he totally thought like they did 100 years ago. He watched Westerns all day long. I would say, Dennis, I think you've seen that same Western 100 times in every language that it actually exists in. But he never got tired of them. And he'd be like, no, I didn't see this one before. But and he had his white shirt, like Doc Holliday, Buffalo Bill. Those were, that's I'm sure he's with them all now and celebrate. Sorry. So I'm sure he's hanging with all the boys now. He's very much a guy's guy, definitely. So
Yeah.
yeah. He's
It,
in a better place and having probably so much fun. I keep thinking, and we had 5 bald eagles that were hanging outside of the house up in the tree while he was in hospice. And after he passed, those bald eagles are gone. But we have so many eagle sightings at very significant times and weird, weird things that are happening. So I'm documenting all of these unique, strange things. So that's why we know he's still here. He's just in a different form. He's definitely a bald eagle, not just any eagle, because Dennis had gray hair. He had a black vest on all the time and a white shirt, just like you could picture the bald eagle and Dennis. Yep. So
I
he
love
lives
that, Gail.
on. He lives on.
I love that. And the bald eagle was so special to him. And I know that he did a lot of paintings of the eagles, um, and he had so many Native American friends that would understand exactly what you're saying.
Yep.
And you and I have worked with Native Americans long enough to know that there's a world out there we just can't explain.
Right. And so that's why I don't feel like he's totally gone, because I
Yeah.
still feel like he's here. And all the Native Americans really want to help and carry on Dennis's work, which is fabulous. So Andrew Johnson,
Mhm.
Hilda Little Vaughan Williams, Lisa D, all those guys are very engaged. We've done a couple talks already. We've got more talks coming up. And so now, even with Dan Malone, the archaeologist, we're going to combine our work to be able to do talks about archaeology, Native Americans, and trail trees. So I think it's going to be, it's a great group that we can really educate a lot of people on, all the history.
That's the magic formula, the not only the ripple, but that and Andrew's going to be on and Dan's going to be on this podcast, and just the accumulation of this knowledge and this institutional knowledge that's going to have legacy because of Dennis. And Dennis really helped me to understand this area and understand what life would have been like when Billy Caldwell was here, but then how they moved through the area, which was, I mean, there's one part on the film where Dennis talks about, snakes slithering and, things that bite you and sting you and can kill you at every turn. And and it really his knowledge was so helpful in trying to really explain what life would have been like a couple of hundred years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like, yeah, he was definitely a survivalist. He would have been able to survive at that time as well. But even, really in his head, just knowing that walk, the walk of the Native Americans at that time for hundreds of years. He understood animals so well. I mean, he would even talk about his hands being his paws, where I was always like, his paw hurt or something. But he had such a connection to nature, and that's why even the Explorers Club out of New York had given him like the wilderness award as like a great explorer, which was what an honor to get that. So he definitely had such a connection to nature, which I've never seen. I mean, from the flying squirrels at his house that would come up, and they were like his pets. So they were not afraid of him. So he had just some innate, um, connection, which you just don't see. Almost a Dr. Doolittle type.
Well, for sure. And Gail, you were with him all those years. What are your plans for the next couple of years to keep his memory alive and his legacy? I know you talked about, some speeches that you're giving and you're continuing the research and stuff, but what are some things that you're really excited about to preserve Dennis's legacy?
Well, and that's really it. It's not trying to create more things. It's a lot about preservation,
Mm.
preserving his legacy from his artwork to the whole history of the trail trees. On the education side, the island we have in Canada with the cabin that Dennis built on it, making sure that is preserved. just, all the things we had going. We have awards that are being done, the Dennis Downs Trail Marker Tree Award to someone each year. We're giving one out. We gave our first one out to um, a lady who teaches up in St. Paul. She's a Ojibwe, and she's going to be teaching trail marker trees as well. And she is our first awardee of the Trail Marker Tree Award. So I said that comes with a lot of commitment. You have to, like definitely keep the history alive. So we'll be doing that each year.
Mhm.
Also at his high school, Dennis went to Glenbrook North High School, and he was a distinguished alumnus a number of years ago at the high school, so quite recognized there. But also we gave just last month, Dennis was an art student there. That's where he got his love for art and creativity. That we gave out this year, we gave out two scholarships to art students that will carry on. And I created the criteria, it had to be creativity and someone never giving up, because Dennis never gave up and you have to follow your passion. And so that's the criteria, and the art teacher would help me select them. So last year we gave one, this year we gave two. So we will continue that recognition of Dennis as well. I also think Dennis's art is so totally different than everybody else's art you see anywhere, that it could be in 100 years from now, but there's going to be like, oh my gosh, do you have a Downs, painting or something? Because it's like, I believe there will be exhibits done, and he will be even recognized more if the Earth lasts another 100 years. Um, his artwork will even be recognized that much more, because it will be so different than any of the contemporary art or any of the just watercolor paintings that we see these days. So I think he will always stand out art-wise in the art world, as well as someone who is very unique, did not follow a normal path, did his own thing. It was always, following his own passions.
I couldn't agree with you more. He's the Rembrandt of our times, that's for sure. And I have my Downs. I have my Downs statue. And I've already put in all the information for my kids. This is not a garage sale item. This is important and very meaningful to me. So,
One other thing that I didn't mention is on keeping Dennis's the work and the legacy alive. So his mom her last name is Berry Ochoa, and they came from the Basque Country in northern Spain. And Dennis has one of his relatives was a saint, Saint Valentine Berry Ochoa, and Dennis did a bronze high relief sculpture that is in the Basque Museum in Idaho, in Boise, Idaho. And so in this next month, we're actually going to Boise, Idaho, and we're going to be doing an installation of a second Dennis Downs bronze sculpture in the Boise Museum. And it's going to be a sculpture of the Basque dancer that is based off of Dennis's cousin, Maury Berry Ochoa, who he had two cousins that were very, very famous dancers. And the Basque, they celebrated their dancing because that's how they stayed in shape for fighting for the wars. So his cousin Maury, when the Basque Country got their autonomy from Spain in 1994, he went to Washington, D.C. and got to do the honorable dance in front of all the dignitaries in Washington, D.C. And so here's a newspaper article about Maury dancing. So Dennis took that article, did a bronze of Maury in the shape that that Maury's in the picture, and now we're dedicating that to the museum. They'll put an article of the whole article that was in the paper, and another, like, more information about Dennis. So now Dennis's history and his whole mom's side of the family, which he was very proud of, the Basque side, the Berry Ochoa side, is going to be recognized that much more in the Basque Museum. So again, we're going to keep doing that. And hopefully one day we're going to, Dennis also always wanted a life-size bronze dancer, Basque dancer, in the park in Boise and right by the Basque Block. So that will be the next step to doing after doing this dedication, we'll try to get a life-size one done in Boise. I also have plans downtown for putting a bronze trail tree in a park downtown too. But
Downtown
stay
where?
tuned on that one.
Yeah,
Um,
downtown.
hopefully by Ohio Street Beach and Jane Addams Park.
Oh, in Streeterville.
Yes, of
Oh,
course.
wonderful. So that's awesome. I
Hmm.
remember when you guys took that trip to Basque and he came back and he was so proud to be with his people and
Yeah,
to understand that Spanish heritage and that native heritage that Dennis was so proud of.
yep. They treated him like royalty there. So
He
it's
loved that trip.
yeah, it was it's yeah, it was a great trip. Probably the best trip we ever went on.
Oh, that's
Yep,
lovely. I
yep,
know he was so proud of it, but to say the best trip, that's
yeah.
awesome.
It was amazing. So,
And
yep.
you mentioned the cabin. I don't want to forget. We have to talk about that cabin. I remember when Dennis started that, gosh, 20 years ago?
Yeah, about 20. We got the island in 2006. So it probably wasn't until about 2010, 11's in there that we actually picked the location and he started working on the cabin.
And to just give listeners an idea of how tough this guy was. You know, he would row a boat from some location to this island. He would cut down trees, float them to the island, take the bark off the trees, fight all the critters that were trying to eat him and eat the tree before he could seal the bark. I mean, the stories he would tell about this, and then use a hoist and a pulley to pull these logs up and create the roof for the cabin, create the walls for the cabin, the floor, and pictures of you and him, you know, carving this stuff by hand. I mean, there wasn't electricity.
No electricity, no water, no equipment outside of this one winch we had and a generator. So pretty much that was it. And yeah, and he was like, at that time he's in his 60s, and but he was a gymnast, you know, growing up. He was actually like a state level gymnast, almost going to the Olympics. But so he could crawl up the side of the logs on the side of the cabin and do things. And then he learned to video himself doing it. And I always went up every summer for like 10 days, but Dennis was up there a lot. So, so he learned to video. So if you go to barbarianshelter.com, that's where we have the different seasons of the building, and you can kind of watch how the cabin got built through the years that he was able to, video the progress. Because actually, you look back at that, and I'm like, I don't know how we ever did that.
I don't know how you did it.
I
And
know,
I mean,
crazy.
who would
Yeah.
have thought to do it? Anybody but Dennis.
Yeah, yeah. His other friends all feel very lazy compared to Dennis, considering he worked so hard on that. But it was he called it Studio North. That was an art project for him. So, yep.
Barbarianshelter.com.
Hmm.
I've seen the pictures, but I haven't seen that website. So I'm going to go to that and make sure I've seen everything. I just remember him talking about taking the bark off the wood and he'd use like a scraper. And
Yep.
then when he got that nice, juicy, gut of the tree, the insects would come and try to start eating it because, they didn't have to do all the work to take the bark off themselves. And so he'd have to seal it pretty quick. And
Hmm.
I think one of the last times he went was when he took that boat out by himself, and there was a terrible storm across. What lake was that on?
It's on Cabanong. There's
Okay.
Cabanong and West Cabanong, but yeah, those lakes are quite large, and the weather can change very, very quickly there.
Just like the
Yeah.
Great Lakes. And I
Mhm.
remember he was taking that boat and going over to the cabin, and the people that would live up there and kind of help him out a little bit, maybe give him a night lodging or something. They were concerned about him, and they went and they waited up all night for him to get back. And here's the guy coming back through the fog with his motorboat, and sure enough, it's Dennis. I mean, this guy was tough.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not even like a motorboat. It's like a tiny little aluminum fishing boat with a 9 horse motor. And you're hauling all your equipment and everything on this tiny little boat. So yeah, it got scary at different times, but and then the fog can roll in. And then you know what? When you're up there in the woods and on the water, everything looks the same. It's just all trees. And so you've got to really know where to navigate. And so he was very good partly with the trail marker trees that of being able to really identify spots that could help him navigate through all the little channels and the bends around just like when you look at the Great Lakes behind you, there's a lot of bends all the way around that it doesn't look so perfect when you're out on the water.
Not so perfect and not easy to navigate. And thank God for trail marker trees and thank God for Dennis Downs. And honest to gosh, it was an honor to know him and to work with him and learn from him and to own a piece of his art. And Gail, you guys have been friends for a long time. And I'm just so grateful for everything that you've done to preserve history. And I'm so glad to hear what you're doing to preserve Dennis Downs' legacy as you move forward with all these exciting projects. Any last thoughts or
No, I'm just so lucky I got to know him and be with him for 25 years. So
Gail, you were a beautiful partner with him and
it
he
was
was
a
lucky
great,
to have you.
yeah, great
And
partnership.
it
So,
was. It
yep,
truly was a beautiful partnership.
yep.
You were the beauty and the brains.
No, I wouldn't say that. He, you know what? We came from different directions. I was much more analytical. He's a creative, and it worked perfectly together. It just worked for us. So that's why I'm counting on him not being gone. He's got to hang around, and he's got to help and keep planting those ideas in my head. I need them. Thank you. So thanks, Dennis. You got to
Well,
stick
anytime you
around.
see a bald eagle, that's a good day, that's for sure.
That's right, absolutely. But thank you, Susan. I appreciate this, and we'll keep everything going.
Awesome. Love you, dear.
Okay, love you too.
All
Take
right.
care. Bye bye.
Bye. Beautiful.
All right.
Beautiful.